So what is here?
Burn it down to the ground. Yeah, burn down every picture that you can find of Mr. Jinnah. That's what India is about.
Yes, sir. You do back?
Yeah, man.
Good. Good evening, everybody. So good to have you all back. I am very excited and honored, actually, to have this lecture organized here. This is the topic that we all are grappling, or yet to take into serious consideration within the larger, actually, global political spectrum. When the neoliberal forces are taking its control through the actual political means of liberal democracy, where do we go from here now? We fought for democratic ethos dating back to the Greco tradition of demos, and yet we are still not finding answers to our suffering. Poor working class continues to suffer. Most marginalized trans, LGBTIQ communities continue to be the most marginalized, who don't get to recognized or who don't have an echo in popular chambers of even radical traditions that we offer, be it Dalit movement or progressive movements in India too. So within this lack of, to use Kimberly Crenshaw's intersectionality, or is this an answer? Caste certainly animates the existence of most happenings in India and beyond. And as Ambedkar had famously said in 1930s, that wherever Hindus will go, they will carry the caste. So caste certainly, as was predicted, has become a very important segment, and we have seen anti-caste activism happening within this space. Boston Study Group tries to organize around the issues of caste, class, communalism, gender, as well as other progressive issues. Most importantly, we are now planning to work on land issues for the landless, and as well as releasing of incarcerated Dalit, tribal, OBC, as well as Muslim people in the prison. So this is our next project that we want to do. I have a special privilege to have Professor Anand Teltumbde come here. Now, this man is an unusual man to be here when you consider his academic training. He's an engineer, mechanical engineer by training, born in a small village, Rajur, in the backward areas of Maharashtra, Yavatmal district, studied in a government school, village school until 7th grade, then again Taluka, and then goes to one of the premier institutes to study engineering in Nagpur. Then goes to study management in IIM Ahmedabad, another premier institute of management, and then does his PhD again in management from University of Mumbai. And yes, so his academic and as well as professional career kind of takes, and he worked in he was sitting for most part of his life on important corporate boards. Simultaneously, as he writes here, he was also carrying red flag. So that is an unusual position, and I always want to find an answer to this. And he still tried to maintain, and he's now no longer working for the corporate sector. I was asking him, why did you go into academia? Did you plan? He said nothing was planned. So I guess the activist organizing, for some of us who want to organize in future, better not to plan. You might end in good hands. In addition to that, he's prominently, for me personally, he is currently the only perhaps analyst as well as thinker and organizer who's saying it out the way it has to say it out, in the tradition, with the lacuna of the Indian left or the Indian Dalit movement. And to be in that position is, I think, very vulnerable, being very fragile. Critiquing the Dalit discourse and staying on the same line, and then critiquing the left discourse and staying on the same line is very difficult to carry on. And this man can do both jobs at the same time and continue to produce those kind of scholarship. We have problems, people having issues of critiquing each other's. If I'm writing critical left or Ambedkar literature, there is a problem of whatever sorts. He has not stopped his pen since then. And so he's, to give his organizing credentials, I mean, he is the general secretary of Committee for Protection of Democratic Rights. It's also a consortium of various progressive organizations that organize around the issues of people, mostly progressive issues that kind of take us back. And his we were just at Harvard Library and we just did an experiment. We typed his name to see how much all Hollis can pick up. There are 149 searches in the library. That just to say and he has a PhD in management, by the way, and he's producing a literature on strict Marxist analysis, bringing caste into the focus, which is a very important. Many people have not done that, selfish interest maybe, or preserving the caste privileges. I have his 4 books. The reason I bought them, I wanted him to sign them. So I thought I'll carry them, and this is occasion. So just for our online people, I just want to show them. These are the 4 books. The recent is Republic of Caste, an amazing statement. The title itself is going to devastate many people who kind of cherish the dreams of republicanism as well as constitutionalism and try to imagine a future. Thank you so much, Arif. Try to imagine a future within the constitutional methods, but sometimes the elite liberal structures work against you by giving false promises within the. And we know the example of America post-slavery, when constitution was merely used to suppress the lives, and 13th document has really, Eva DuVernay has really shown us in that 1 hour and put us in the place. And so these are the policies. India is still yet grappling 70 years into its kind of immature phase, and caste is a question that many people still consider untouchable. And so we have academic savarnas and we have academic untouchables. Someone who raised the issue of caste becomes academic untouchable, and somebody who talks within certain elite jargons becomes the so-called emancipator of certain issues. And within this, we have seen how neoliberalism is taking its hold. Prominently, the poor working class, farmers and landless continue to be the most marginalized. People who are working on day wage, they still have to struggle to survive. Private corporations coming in. We are trying to find our ideological balances, and within this, someone else is winning the war. And we can see that too. Privatization of knowledge has become one of the significant sort of interventions post 1980s. And Harvard is one epitome of what a private education can, offer. So here we are, try to think how revolutionary politics can be imagined through caste and class nexus, in addition to bringing these two kind of superstructures, and how we can sort of undeify some of the figures that we are trying to uphold and unwilling to critically engage with their thoughts, because sometimes deification only limits us. We want to break those idols, as Ambedkar himself had claimed to be an iconoclast. Unfortunately, he himself has become an icon for us, and similarly has happened with Marx, who himself was not a Marxist, but we have become and divided. So we have orthodox Marxism, unorthodox Marxism, progressive Marxism. We have that in Ambedkarism. And so now the question is, people are critiquing each other without really getting under the skin and then trying to find the balances of both. In this moment, Professor Teltumbde writes a famous blog, a famous column for the most famous Asia's economic and political weekly, which is again under the government's sanction right now. So he writes a column called Margins Speak. It has been one of the most powerful contemporary statements that we want to get every month as we are trying to understand what's happening in current India. He has authored many books. One of his books, The Persistence of Caste, that was aftermath of Khairlanji massacre, where a Dalit woman was lynched and her family was killed. His statement, and he is the scholar who doesn't read news reports and produces analysis. He's right there on his field. I was told by the Telangana activist that this man was there. I don't remember the place where he dedicated himself, and he's traveling across. So we have the elite discourses, but we have the discourses from below, very much of a Gramscian organic theory. On that note, may I please request you all to welcome Professor Anand Teltumbde for his mediation on caste, class, and nationalism.
Good evening. Thank you, Suraj, for the brilliant preface. caste and class. This duality really is the bane of our times. This has created such a vexatious situation in India that, in my language, I said that India lost revolution because of this. Caste, I think not all are Indians here, so caste is like any one could pass it as something like a system of stratification, social stratification. Okay, and social stratification existed in all the societies all over the world, but still it is something novel. Why this kind of novelty has come in to be associated with caste needs to be fathomed. But we are not going to get into that because that's a different and very speculative kind of matter. So we will not get into those things. But something like in this book, this Dalit, I had noted that kind of speculation, because if we want to sort of understand why only caste exists in India, there must be something unique with India. India meaning Indian subcontinent, Pakistan included. And I tried to sort of reason it out that the reason actually lies in the natural endowment of the subcontinent, which is relevant for something like settled agriculture. When tribals were getting settled for agriculture, the world over, they underwent something like social structural change. They did not have to do that in India because of the plenty of agricultural land, very congenial kind of climate, and all those kinds of things. So it's a speculation. It's a hypothesis. There's no. I'm not claiming any value beyond that. That apart, there have been lots of changes that came in. How did caste come? The usual kind of theorization, dominant theorization perhaps, is that Aryans came from some tribes. Aryan tribes came from Central Asia or West Asia or somewhere, and they vanquished the tribes out in India, and they brought in Varna system. Previously 2, then 3, then 4, and then 5. So they multiplied. So that kind of thing overall one could see, and then people relate this Varna system evolved into caste system. Probably it is not so. It is reverse. So that's what again I mentioned in that when these tribals settled in India, they did not have to undergo any structural change, and they settled with their tribal identities. Even today also some people, anthropologists, etc., say that Indians are basically tribals in modern garb. Their names also are tribal totems. So most of the people carry the same kinds of things. So the caste came in first, and then when this whosoever has come from wherever they came from, their system actually, as a victor, they superimposed that. So the previous caste, we did not have a sense of hierarchy, and Varna had hierarchy, and this superimposition brought in something like a hierarchical sense in caste, and not many changes must have happened. There was internal resistance also in India. There was Shraman stream. So these people came from as a Brahmins who had social hegemony, but they were opposed constantly by the Shraman stream. The survivals of the Shraman stream are namely Buddhism and Jainism. Unfortunately, they got institutionalized into Islam thereafter, and some of them, like Jainism, got Hinduized, Brahmanized in course. But there was a resistance. But for large part of it, this structure became the life world of the system, the people. meaning thereby that even the lowlier people also internalized it, that they were low only. So this needs to be understood. uh, why there has not been, because this is the longest surviving man-made system in the world. Caste system of India is the longest surviving man-made system of the world, and we do not find any kind of resistance to this. So there must be some attributes of the system which actually comforted people living in, apart from stability. So this life world lasted approximately at least 2000 years. The caste system, the origin of system in this form is dated something like 2nd century, 3rd century AD, but it could go beyond something little with the, and its formative stage. So this has happened and it lasted until medieval times. Many people came in from the north. They they invaded India. Something like it, the story goes back to Alexander, for that matter. They came up to an Indian border. They then he returned. Some Greeks actually settled down. So these kinds of turbulence has been happening in north, particularly because south there is a sea, and that was in ancient time there were some migrations, etc. But largely in north, these things have been happening constantly. So these people came and settled. They got mixed up with the society. They adopted a caste. Probably if they were in good position, they might have been given the rank by Brahmins as Kshatriya. So most of the thing, this most of the people, meaning high-ranking people, became Kshatriya, the next order, next in order. So this way, the order stabilized. It got jolt first time in a medieval times when Islamic culture got step, meaning the people again the people came in with meaning Islam as such, but they did not settle there, but they settled somewhere in 15th century, and from there on an alternative civilization became something like available in India. So particularly for lower caste, it was something like an opening of an horizon. Oh, there can be an alternate god, there can be an alternate system or alternate religion, because until then they had not heard of it. And a lot of lower people, meaning lower caste people, actually uh, went to Islam. Something like Vivekanand like person says that 1/5 of the Hindu population became Muslims that time. There were other things also, not a religious attraction, but Islam came with something like advanced feudalism of Central Asia, and a lot of material changes also took place. They established uh, cities. Then they naturally they would require a lot of surplus population to the artisan like population, the merchants, etc. So all those kinds of people were drawn from village. And the lower caste people, particularly the Dalits and the Shudra band, the lower ones who actually do the manual work and live of that, these people had very low valency with the village system. So they took an opportunity and migrated to cities and towns, etc., and had a good opportunity. And in course of time, or they became Muslims. So this was the first jolt to this system. Thereafter, after some 300 years of Islamic rule, thereafter the European colonialist came, and they had given a bigger shock. Although these people came to colonize India, but along with came lot many things. The Christian missionaries started coming in. They opened up schools in India. So the first time, and this happened initially against the rulers. The ruler did not want, because in interest of rule, they in their interest, they did not want to disturb the social system. But Christian missionaries, etc., went ahead and they opened up schools for untouchables. So the first time the doors of education opened up for the Dalits. And the kind of consciousness started dawning, that, oh, they are also human beings, and these are all rights, and all that discourse of rights, etc., came along with Western liberalism. And the churning started taking place. Thereafter, anyway, state followed, and there is a lot of history, so we don't have to go. But these are certain milestones. And in the at the dawn of last century, something like a Dalit movement started taking shape. So, and very independently in every region of India. So educated people came up, and again during the British colonialism, particularly, many material changes also took place apart from education, and they were supplementing this development. Like for colonial logic, uh, there were a lot of projects opened up. Okay, because British had to extract raw materials, carry it to London, like cotton and things like. So there had to be road, there had to be railway thereafter, and so many things were had happened. Before that, even East India Company, the most of the meaning East India Army, they came for commerce, but then their entire thing turned to politics, so that they had to maintain an army, etc. The first of the people that went into army were the Dalits again. So this is the story. So because of this education and thereafter the opportunities, for economic development, so a section was section rose up in urban areas, and they took cudgel for this, and naturally the Dalit movement was carved out. The character of the Dalit movement was naturally the people who came up in urban area. So they had some economic development. They, meaning sheer hard work, they entered into certain petty businesses, and became something economically independent. And this way, they these people collected together, and some fellows took a leadership, etc., and then they launched the movement. So naturally, these people had the focus of something like the such that when their class, will not call a class, but that was the that was, and it would always happen like that. So such movements actually happened in every province, and soon thereafter came Dr. Ambedkar. He's a legendary personality. If you sort of look at it, something like all providential forces came together to make Ambedkar. It looks like that, because everything happens. He's so lucky a person, that everything comes on a platter, and he reaches Columbia and all. It's unthinkable. He was the first, something like a graduate from among the Dalits, and okay, you can graduate, but then somebody gives him scholarship to reach Columbia, then he takes full advantage of that, and voraciously actually goes after accumulating knowledge. And this is all up at one stage it appears something like unusual. So that kind of person actually takes up the leadership of the movement, and Dalit movement, then thereafter the meaning it that is what therefrom the Dalit movement actually comes up of a. So initially, Ambedkar's strategy was that he would agitate so as to sensitize the caste Hindus about this problem, such that some of the advanced sections of them would come forward to carry out reforms. So he had not imagined that beyond that it is necessary or something like that, and could be even gradual reforms. Through gradual reforms, things could be made better for Dalit. That was his approach. So he did and first of the agitation in Mahad for asserting Dalit rights on public water source. So it was not to gain that right. Rights actually were given by the law 3 years before. So it was something like an assertion, and it also came some a very extempore manner. That there was a conference, and next day they just decided before concluding it that let's walk on over to the Chaudhar tank and assert our right. And these people were after they were returning, these caste Hindus, some guns of caste Hindus attacked them and injured, and that became an episode. So the entire thing actually it belied, I mean, it frustrated Ambedkar, and he was very angry, and he again decided this first conference was not organized by him, but the second conference in anger, Ambedkar, just after 9 months, again he does the second conference as a satyagraha. That every day there would be a satyagraha on Chaudhar tank for water, and they would establish their right, not secure their right, but establish their right. But there also the Hindus frustrate him, taking a court injunction that the tank did not belong to, I mean, that was not a public tank and it was a private tank. So these laws not apply. So again, they frustrated him. Getting thus frustrated with this method, then Ambedkar turns his eyes towards politics, because Morlamento reforms and all this, lot of changes were coming in politics. So Morlamento reforms in 1909. So there, the Muslim League actually gives a clue. It insinuates just to take a share of politics. They said that Dalits and Adivasis are not the Hindus. So that was a clue. Because it was according to the population, etc., the Muslims and Hindus were to be given a political share. So naturally, if they're excluded, there would be something like a Muslims would have a balancing strength. So this was the clue, and Ambedkar starts actually was threatening that he would convert and all those kinds of things. So this goes on. Then we'll just take stock of major things. So major opportunity comes up when British call up this roundtable conference in London in 3032, and there Ambedkar actually wins the right of separate electorates. Separate electorates meaning Dalits will have their own constituency. Only Dalit candidates would contest there, and they will get elected, and even they would have a vote in a general constituency. So that kind of arrangement. But the Gandhi then thereafter, Gandhi frustrates him. He blackmails him into signing. He goes on to indefinite fast unto death, and Ambedkar is forced to sign that thing and give up that separate electorate. So it's a joint electorate kind. So in that, the pact in India 1935 Act, and in the pact with Gandhi called Pune Pact gets incorporated into India Act 1935, and as a result, the reservations get instituted for Dalits in Parliament. And even in that time, it was not meaning in educational institutes and public job employment. It did not come as a reservation, but because there were not adequate qualified people, and the British rulers actually said that if you bring to our notice that if somebody is educated, we'll give him an appropriate post. This gets converted into reservation when Ambedkar actually reaches the Viceroy's Executive Council. he make just an innocuous note that I don't think that this preferment policy has been working, and let's actually transform it into quota. So this entire reservation system comes into being in 1943 in both the things. Firstly, political reservations come into being in 1937. This is the kind of major milestones in caste. This is very important because later on, what after transfer of power, whatever that happens, it has got a very intimate context. Now, in order to implement 1935 Act, one thing happens. The Britishers make a schedule in 1936 with a criteria that all the communities which were untouchables would be clubbed together and would be called scheduled caste, because they would be clubbed together in a schedule, a separate schedule will form. So what does it mean? That it could be construed that the umbilical cord of caste from Hinduism was actually snapped there. An administrative category was created because all the castes were merged into that. Okay, so that could be. So this is very important to understand the post-colonial India, the way the state gets formed and constitution gets written. So this is very important because the contemporary caste has got an intimate context to that. What happens after independence is the Congress Party, which assumed the leadership of the freedom struggle, gets natural kind of leadership in the post-colonial state, also in constitution of state. The first cabinet that gets formed, it was an all-party cabinet. At instance of Gandhi, Ambedkar gets inducted as a law minister. And Ambedkar wanted to get into the Constituent Assembly because the cabinet mission, the conditions of transfer of power, one of the conditions was the Constituent Assembly would be constituted as a quasi-parliament. So, and but the membership of the Constituent Assembly, they did not have a separate election. The membership would be actually sort of elected through the provincial assembly election held in February 1946. Ambedkar's party had only two candidates, one in that election. So there was no way that Ambedkar could reach a constituent assembly. But he manages through, and from East Bengal, with the help of his comrade Jogendranath Mandal, he reaches Constituent Assembly. In Constituent Assembly, but his membership actually gets annulled by the Mountbatten Plan of Partition of India, and because East Bengal goes to Pakistan. So this happens, and there was some kind of patch-up with which Congress actually gets him elected from Bombay Assembly, and before the Constituent Assembly's next session starts, he gets his membership restored. And Gandhi's vision, the Gandhi strategy, makes him something like a chairman of the drafting committee, which is the quite an important committee. The strategy was that if Ambedkar-like person, because Ambedkar had emerged already as an icon of the lower caste, if Ambedkar-like person is made to write a constitution, it's not a writing the constitution that needs to be understood, but made to something like the constitution sells in his name as a chief architect of the constitution, the entire lower strata in course of time would uphold this constitution. Okay, this is the palpable reality. Now, this today, if you utter anything against constitution, Dalit would be up in arms. Okay. So this was the Gandhi's strategic stroke. Now let's come to the Congress characteristic. The Congress basically was a club of Indian elites as it started. There were many associations started, but this came to survive. So landlords, merchants, and the professionals, like mainly barristers, these people actually constituted Congress. The first of the 16 presidents of Congress, 11 were barristers. Okay, the Western educated kind of barristers, etc., were the people. Initially, there was a meaning. It was kind of umbrella organization with varied kinds of interest. Landlords were there. Their interest will not cohere with the bourgeoisie, which were coming up, and that would not, both will not cohere with something like, so their demands, etc. If you see, there is a kind of incoherence, so satisfying all sections of people. But in course of time, Congress realized that the development of India would be through capitalism. So they came to represent capitalist interest. Gandhi comes in 1915, returns from South Africa, and almost actually transformed Congress as a mass movement. Until then, it was an elite club, so it becomes a mass movement. So it actually confuses people while one looks at the Congress. The parallel could be drawn. Kuomintang in China, the way Kuomintang was understood by people, that is a mass movement kind of thing, but internally, after the Chiang Kai-shek played China, thereafter all their real kind of face actually came up, that they were actually working in the interest of the capitalist. The same happened in India. The same parallel could be seen in the form of Congress. When transfer of power took place, the Congress surreptitiously started working for that aim. Now there are a lot of evidences, but everything that they did with a Brahminic kind of cunning. So every policy they would announce in the name of people, but would be opposite to that. The real content of the policy would be opposite to people, right? Opposite to interests of people. So this started happening. During the constitution, in the context of caste, it needs to be understood, because as I said, in contemporary caste are not the classical caste. This is what happens with the scholars writing on caste, that they actually draw the same kind of thing as if it's a continuum. It is not. There is a break of sort. A little mixing with rhetoric, I would say that today's castes are the constitutional caste. They are not the Manu ordained caste. Very skillfully, Constitution preserved these two things, which actually were the proven weapons to divide people, namely caste. Second was religion. The caste problem and the communalism problem. These are the prominent problems of India today, and its roots are in the Constitution. How did they do that? The way of writing the Constitution, again, one needs to just briefly see what was the Constituent Assembly. Constituent Assembly was indirectly elected, as I said. That election was not a universal franchise. If you take stock of that, something like 1/4 of population only was represented in the provincial assemblies, and those people sent their representatives to the Constituent Assembly. That means you can say that only 1/4 of the elite who had property, who had education, they only had a voting rights, and they reached the Constituent Assembly. So they did not represent the ordinary people. Well, the Constitution's draft was already made. And admittedly, everybody admits, there is no dispute about it, that 3/4 of the Indian Constitution is nothing but the India Act 1935. And rest of it was sort of an amalgam of picked up from many constitutions. So it is all documented. So this is the nature of the constitution. Now certain things and the process of actually taking decision on various clauses was that there were subcommittees formed to consider the draft, and subcommittees would come out of the decision, and there was an advisory committee. All the advisory committees, most of them were headed by congressmen, well, namely Vallabhbhai Patel, Jawaharlal Nehru. So, so what came in the constitution was the opinion of the Congress, and one way the elite kinds of people, and either way the this kind of. So they, as regards caste, they wanted to preserve caste. How did they preserve? It's interesting. So they they preserved it with the pretext that they wanted to do social justice to low caste. What is social justice? Reservations. All well, if they had that kind of intention, reservation could be extended. The situation was not such that they could have stopped the reservation that came through colonial times. Well, if they wanted to even extend that, there was no need to refer to the Hindu caste because there was a schedule already as an administrative category was in place. So they could have really adopted. So only if they had extended it to Dalit, probably it would have appeared artificial. So what they did is they extended this reservations to the tribes. They made a separate schedule. Now see, if your intention is towards annihilating caste or something like that, then there was an option of even clubbing those people into the same schedule. They could rename it. And as a result, what would have happened? Because tribals do not have the stigma of caste. So it would have diluted the caste as such, but then kept that parallel schedule. Okay. Going beyond that, they had included a vague clause in the constitution that state would find out. They do not know themselves. It is written in such a language that state would actually search such kind of people who are educationally and socially backward. So reservations were never linked to the backwardness. Reservations were something like a countervailing force of a state to make the civil society behave. Because howsoever Dalit was endowed with merit or whatever, the situation was such that this society would never give them their rights. So because of that, it was something like a countervailing force to post people to grant them their dues. But this has not happened. Now with these kinds of clause, the entire backwardness got linked to the reservations. This was a OBC reservation, which actually commission after commissions, etc., went on sort of churning out. How many people are there? Nobody knew. And ultimately, with a political exigency, VP Singh in 1990 granted it. It was akin to something like constructing a can of caste worms, the deed of which can be opened at convenient time, and to casteist society. Exactly same thing happened. So with this backwardness kind of thing associated with the reservation, you would find that there is no community in India which does not claim reservation. Because anybody can, because even the Brahmins will have some people, this becomes a contentious issue that, yeah, we also are educationally backward. How will you decide? We are also socially backward. So there are caste and caste among everything. So this is the kind of thing that was created. Another factor that I just mentioned about the religion. The subcommittee had decided that India be secular country. India must be secular country. Nehru was the advisory committee's chairman. He almost passed the reprimand the subcommittee, saying that those people utter secularism. They do not understand the meaning of secularism. Well, Nehru was a Harrow and Cambridge educated person, so English was nice. So nobody could challenge. So he knew secularism meant only something like a firewall between religion and politics. So that they did not. What was brought in is the dharma nirapekshata. That itself is indicative of what is going to happen, because dharma nirapekshata or something like that is a Sanskrit adage, and it is associated with the majority community. It's associated with Hinduism. So, and with their kind of thing, you are defining the secularism. So this is exactly was preordained in this thing. Pretext was that state should have space to uh, do some religious reforms, to bring in certain religious reform. Over 70 years of history, post-independence history, what religious reform they carried out? One. Just to name. That kind of reform actually existed in colonial times also, but it was a rehash of that. When 17 years widow, that Roop Kanwar, was burnt on her husband's pyre in 1987, they brought in a law, anti-sati law. That is the only reform probably that stands to justify that pretext. Okay, and the kind of cost given to that uh, is before anyone. Almost now we are standing at the 8. So this is a story of caste. It could be illustrated also little going beyond how the capitalist interests were, because that has relation with caste. So that's why I will just briefly say so. They carried out land reforms. There was a hunger for land. If the intentions were right, just to implement land reforms, they could have been a central subject. Okay? No, that was a state subject. So central passed a law of land reform that these kinds of things and passed on to states. So state in turn enacted their laws. Right? I tried to understand what kind of land reforms took place in India. At least I could not. There might have been many PhDs done on that, but I don't think anybody is in position to cogently present that these were the land reforms that took place. What happened was that there were tenancy kinds of things. There were landlords in India, and some land ceiling acts, etc., were passed by states, and the extra land was, so to say, here and there they took out and was distributed among the peasants. Those people who were on record as tenants, they got it. So the farming caste generally got the land. Dalits were actual tillers of the land, they were excluded. Here and there some stray people got it, then that they are not to be counted. So generally this was the trend that the farming caste, and there is a schema, farming caste belongs to the most popular Shudra band of caste. Congress did not have a foothold in rural India, and they wanted to create their agent in rural India. So co-opt some of these people. So this is the process of creating that kind of people, their ally in the rural India, political ally. So this way the land was, the peasant land proprietors were created, and immediately the green revolution was brought in. That is a capitalist strategy to enhance the productivity of agriculture. Again, India had a hunger, and so in the name of people, land reforms were carried out. In the name of hunger of people, the green revolution was brought in. Green revolution worked. Agriculture productivity went manifold. But all those surpluses actually were pocketed by these newly created peasant owners. And there are case studies. Many people studied in very many contexts. Andhra Pradesh is one very prominent case study. So what happened was, this is all surplus came in a pure this thing, and it sort of created a class of rich farmers. Now India stands to be the only country wherein the state was formed first and it creates its own congenial class. Normally, what should happen, that everywhere what has happened is that the classes come into being, ruling classes, etc., and they constitute their state. It is a reverse process and remains unnoticed. The connection with caste is that this, with this kind of green revolution, etc., their capitalist relations flood in rural area, because for that capitalist farming you require uh, inputs, high yielding variety of seeds, you require water, you require pumps, you require implement, tractors, that, etc. So there was a corresponding markets created. You require money, the credit market was created, banks came in. So input market, output market, implement market, all kinds of service markets to repair the things, etc. So all kinds of things, that these kinds of relations flood the rural area. The Dalits, as a result, get denuded, because in a feudal caste system, at least caste had a characteristic that it is a system of interdependence. In a closed village, there was a relation of interdependence. Now these collapse, these relations collapse, and Dalits are reduced to be a rural proletariat with their bare hands to work on the farms of these rich farmers for wages. So this contradiction, the Dalit labor versus the rich farmer, Shudra caste farmer, actually becomes a crucial thing. What happens is, the landlord, erstwhile landlords, who typically belong to higher caste, in Brahmin like, they get displaced. Okay, they are casual to that. You have bigger opportunities coming up in towns and cities, so they get displaced from it. The baton of Brahminism comes into the hands of these rich farmers, who are not culturally sophisticated. Okay, and they have a backup of the population. They're the most popular band. So although the rest of the people would be left out poor and maybe even Dalit like, but there is an association of the caste. So with that thing, they would actually identify those. So this contradiction between the wage labor and the capitalist farmer actually starts surfacing. Okay, so the good example is Kilven Many in 1968, this 25th December. It actually surfaces in a very ghastly atrocity, wherein 44 women and children were burnt alive by a landlord's army. So in typical way, something like that Persistence of Caste that Suraj referred to, I illustrated, because that was a big opportunity for me to illustrate this mechanism of atrocity. How it constitutes, what are the players, who are the agents, all those kinds. So this is what, that's why I wrote that book. And again, normally, again very lazily, people would see that, oh, atrocities have been happening for 3,000 years. No, atrocities are the product of this political economy. And it only happens in 60s, late 60s, because of the process that I just narrated. You chronologically put this point and it automatically happens. It's a very, very neat kind of equations, but people ignore it. So because caste was a life world, there was no occasion when you internalize that you are lowly and you deserve that position only. You could still even see if remote areas you go and people behave the same way. The things are not changed, right? Well, so this is the cunning, meaning entire colonial governance structure remains intact in the transfer of power. I just said about constitution, but the institutional structure, there is no iota of change that happens. Same IAS officers, same IPS officers, same governance structure, same police, same seditious laws, same everything. IPC, which actually interfaces common man, remains the same. So everything remains the same. So colonial exploitation structure remains the same, and in addition to that, the Brahminic cunning is added to that, and that becomes a deadly mix. Now, in relation to many people get confused. So let me say that also, because when Constituent Assembly was in session, so that time they passed a resolution and outlaw untouchability. Untouchability gets abolished. Okay, because that used to be the demand of all upper caste reformers, that they always spoke about against untouchability, because it was a very embarrassing kind of custom, not caste. Many people actually get confused with that, and untouchability was abolished, caste is abolished. No, untouchability is just mere aspect of a caste, and if caste survive, and which were made to survive, untouchability cannot go. The empirical evidence to that is surveys after surveys from 1960 onward until the 3 surveys take place in 21st century show that the untouchability is intact. Okay, so this also probably was worth saying. Now, what is the connection with class? What is class? Now, class is variously defined. Before Marx, also people dwelt upon caste, etc., class, etc. But class has a specific definition in Marxism. Namely, when Marx says that the entire known history of the world is the history of class struggle. Okay, what does it mean? The entire dialectics actually plays out through the class struggle, and it actually brings out the process of change. What it means is that there there cannot be anything out of class, isn't it? He has not said that because something remains out of class also. There is no such kind of mentions. If you look at scientifically toward his schema, then it is not like that. So it is the classist struggle, and out of that the revolution would happen and usher in social change. Okay, transformation, revolutionary transformation. That means there are many contradictions in society or some such divisions in society. One cannot say that they are not significant, but what it means is that the classes should incorporate them, isn't it? The class analysis is not to be done in sitting in an armchair or some formula. Class analysis is to be done in the concrete situation obtaining in particular country. So this the duality of caste and class actually originates out there. The early comrades, they could be pardoned because they were opening literature or dished out and was smuggled via Britain and all, and British party was in command and all those kinds of things. But problem was they were Brahmins also. And in Brahminism, something like a written text or something like Shabda Pramanya so that attitude also mattered. In addition to that, so it was not merely the non-availability of the text or understanding, but there was attitude. Evidence to that later on, the very leading comrade like S.A. Dange, who headed communist movement for quite some time, he writes that communism was in Veda itself. Okay. So this is the kind of evidence to the communist attitude. So there are a lot of such kind of things that could be correlated. And what happens is that they conceive classes in India in using the molds of meaning European molds, and they try to sort of fit in things, and they conceive, and caste actually gets isolated. Caste gets isolated as a superstructure. There is something like in Marxism, base and superstructure. Base is taken as economic. And firstly, there is a misunderstanding about the base and superstructure. So the very mechanical understanding is that only economics prevails and rest of the things are minor. They will actually automatically follow and all. The dialectical relations, and many people theorized or commented on that right from angles, because it created a confusion in Europe itself. The situation in Europe is not as complex as India, but this was actually commented in the context of Europe that it is not so. Even the superstructure also could be influential at times. It is only in ultimate analysis that base prevails. Okay, the matter prevails, the material prevails. That is what it meant. So there was not a big confusion about it. But they relegated caste, which was the pervasive reality of Indian society, to the superstructure. It did not come into their schema. So only through practice of certain comrades, etc., they confronted this reality, and they had taken. So it is not that communist movement is totally ignores in certain pockets. Like one can cite the examples of Telangana struggle and Tanjore struggle, Debaga struggle thereafter. So such are the some struggles wherein the caste is prominently taken. Purpose is taken because they were present struggle, rural-based struggle, and caste comes in. And one would find that wherever this struggle took place, now Telangana, for instance, even if you go to Telangana today, in 2000, Suraj mentioned that Telangana, he did not know the name, Patpalli in Mehboob Nagar. I sort of led that struggle, meaning I was associated intimately. I was in IIT Kharagpur, but I used to come every week almost and physically remain there and saw the important nodes. So, meaning it is caste is alive there. You can see that. Okay. You can imagine 1948 or 49 kind of period, and what could be the situation. But suddenly, in a mode of struggle, this was totally forgotten. All this kind of people slept together, people ate together, people fought together and died together. Okay, so this happened. So the people who amplify caste, it's not very correct. Okay, had this duality been shunned right at the beginning, the Indian history would have been totally different. So in that context, I say that India lost a revolution because of this. This is the cost that we paid for this nonsense. Now, I think this is enough for caste in class, but there is nationalism, and that is again a palpable problem. Now, nationalism, if you ask Modi and company today and his cohorts, they would say, no, they claim India was a nation for Treta, since Treta Yuga and all, You can't count those zeros also. How many zeros could be there? Nation is a modern phenomena. It comes with the development. Everybody knows, meaning in formal terms. So it's a 16th century nation states are born. Before that, there was nothing. And in India, it's a colonial time only could be associated. There was nothing. A nation was not known. India did not exist, as a matter of fact. Okay, there was nothing like India. So it's the gift of British rather that they consolidated area. At various points in time, India had different shapes and size. But today's India did not exist before British. So now there is no question of Indian nation. Now, with thousands of castes, and nobody knows really, you'll have to say it in vague terms, thousands only. And because caste is not simple, caste is Caste doesn't end. Dalit is not a caste. There are constituent caste. And those caste, each caste, those constituent caste, already scheduled caste, how many are there? Thousands or something?
Yeah.
No, not thousands. It's a few thousands. I forget the number. 6,000 plus. The initial schedule was done, and those many castes were included in the schedule that I talked about. Each of those castes had subcaste, and typically each of the caste would have something like 40-50 subcasts. And one does not know those subcaste would not have a subcaste. So this is the kind of situation. So Ambedkar, for instance, said that with these kinds of castes, there is no question of India being a nation. And in his own way, he cautioned that this needs to be overcome. If India aspires to be a nation, then this problem will have to be tackled. And soon it does, better it is. Now this tribe, the ruling tribe, the contemporary tribe has come, and it with this kind of explanation, one could see that they were destined to come. The story goes that, and many people like communists particularly included, because they the parliamentary communists, they would justify their actions, that. So there is a dictum in India. They would say that in order to fight communalism or for a secularism, we would do this thing. So that gets justified automatically. All acrobatics would get justified. As I said, secularism was already deleted from the scheme, and there was nothing that was secular in India. So the pretext of secularism, etc., is invalid. If you trace the roots of this communalism, so it goes back to something like 1880s, etc., or even prior to that. There were a lot of streams came, say, thinking that some reformist streams, some people try to rejuvenate the Hindu society, taking clues from the Western science and rationality, etc., represented by the stream like Brahmo Samaj, Ram Mohan Roy, and people like that. And another stream actually wanted to kind of regeneration of Hindu thing. So going to the roots of Vedas, that everything is in Veda and we should actually purify. And that kind of streams were there. In course of time, the latter actually overpowers, represented by, say, Arya Samaj for that matter, Shuddhi, Sanghatan, and all that kind of thing, and denigrating all other religions. That's Hinduism only is a superior religion, and everything existed here. All people have stolen. Today this is very commonly heard. I was in IIT, and to celebrate 60th year of our foundation, there was kind of year-long program, and the program culmination took place with a script written by one of senior professors, which depicted that every invention, every discovery took place only in India, and all other people have stolen that. This is the nonsense that is played out in the hallowed institutions like IIT. Okay, so you can imagine what might be happening elsewhere. So actually, the way it happened was like when Dayananda Saraswati, the Arya Samaj founder, died. So in 1883, 2 years before the Congress was formed, so in a condolence meeting itself, it was decided that his mission would be carried on with founding the Hindu Sabhas. And the Hindu Sabhas were formed in Punjab, right? Punjab is harbinger, pioneer. So many people who later on became a Congress leaders were the part of that. They actually shouldered that, and almost by the by the end of the century, they say that every district of Punjab had Hindu Sabhas. And later on, that Hindu Mahasabha came in, etc. 1906, they typically project that the Hindu Mahasabha was formed in response to Muslim League, uh, foundation of Muslim League, but it is not true. Hindi Sabha precede Muslim League, and League also is the kind of response, because Hindus were consolidating, so there would be correspondingly Muslim where population is sizable population, so they also took that step, and they also started actually consolidating. Then communalism went on sort of shaping up. So that is the root of communalism. This is only in the context that there is a misunderstanding of people who consider Congress to be secular and only BJP being not secular. Actually, there are plethora of evidence that can be given, but we will not go into that. This is sufficient. Congress has, there is hardly any difference between Congress and BJP, excepting for the latter. BJP is an ideology-driven party. They had a vision of Hindu Rashtra, which they are actually in the untouchable range now. And Congress behaved with expediency. So they made a structure and went on sort of taking or enacting things as it was convenient to them. So most of the things in recent times you could relate the rise of Hindutva with something like bungling of Rajiv Gandhi in opening of Ram Mandir locks, etc. So that history would not be very clear in short. So let us shun it. But such kind of steps could be associated with rise of Hindutva, because in 84 BJP had some 4 seats, I think, in parliament, and they jumped to 80 odd seats in next election in 89. Okay, so there is kind of correlation that that can be shown. Another animal that came to their support was neoliberalism, because there is an affinity between these two kind of thing. So in 90, India adopted the neoliberal policies, and neoliberalism is nothing but something like a social Darwinist kind of thing, when market would take care. And so the elitist kind of ethos and all those kinds of, there is a parallel that goes on in Hindutva thing also. And you will find again empirically that there is a parallel kind of growth of Hindutva forces with the neoliberal kind of thing, to the extent that that comes and in these forces actually take up power, meaning initial earlier also they had got power for brief spells, but now it is a different kind of situation. There is a pact of sort with Modi, backed up by the global capital, that he has demonstrated amply that in Gujarat, over a long period, that he would serve the imperialist forces well, much better than Congress. So they have tested, meaning such kind of incidents, that he actually enacts a 2002 carnage of Muslims and still get over. And he establishes that even Muslims vote for him. So this kind of thing he is repeatedly presents to gain confidence of global capital, and with that backing actually he rises now. And these are, as I said, they are very organized and strategic force. Today they have, firstly, when Modi has decimated almost opposition. There is no opposition in India. So situation is such that people are totally harassed during his 4 years. And excepting for this core group, Modi got only 31% votes in 2014, and he keeps on claiming that 1.25 billion people actually are with him. That apart, so that is his core constituency. Take something like 25 to 27%, which are totally sold out to them. Equal number probably is opponent of them. They're hardcore. Rest of the people and even the opponents do not know whom to vote, because when it comes to that, they are totally convinced that this man could not deliver on any promise. Nothing has happened. On the contrary, we suffered thing. The former his constituency people would say that, oh, they repeat his own dialogue. For instance, in demonetization context, people of his camp used to say, oh, राष्ट्र के लिए थोड़ा सा तकलीफ सहा तो क्या होता है? I mean, if you bear some inconvenience for the sake of nation, what is so what a great deal in that? So that kind of dialogue they would repeat. But rest of the now situation is such that people are opposed to, but when it comes to casting a vote, then they would ask whom to vote, and there is no convincing answer to that, and people land up. Gujarat was a case in point that we lost an election. Now Karnataka, whatever that happens, so we are at that. But this is okay. This is relevant because it has been created. The situation is created by this bungling with caste and class. So that should not be forgotten. And the another unfortunate thing is that this is not adequately realized by the left forces. What their response should be to float Dalit organizations, to be manned by Dalits. Yeah. So there are this parliamentary left has floated everywhere something like Dalit organizations. Some are working fine, some are not. But again, it should be seen that those particular organization is something like a Dalit department of mainstream. Okay, so they're typically manned by Dalit people, Dalit work there, etc. And there is no kind of, so that organic kind of relation, that struggle against caste, struggle and against patriarchy, struggle against communalism, etc., etc., are to be taken as an integral part of the class struggle. That understanding is yet to dawn. I think I stop here. Thank you so much for your patience.
So what we can do is
We can have some discussion.
Yes, this was excellent presentation. You have covered so much, and I think this was a tour de force. I think it was very important to get the history lesson of how class kind of debate comes to form, caste comes to form. Modern day caste is different than the Manu's caste claims. And then we have the question of nationalism. So, and these are very toxic elements that are actually entertaining our disturbed minds. So I invite you to engage. Please introduce yourself and ask a question.
Hi, I'm Kanishka. I'm doing a PhD here in anthropology. So I got the sense that it seemed as though you're saying that Modi's rise is largely because of his neoliberal policies. But I always had the sense that, it's his Hindutva that actually helped bring the neoliberal policies in. Because if you think about it, practically every party promises development and, infrastructure and foreign. Congress did the same thing. They tried to open up the economy, bring in foreign investment. And the difference with Modi is just that, his talk of development has a undertone of Hindutva. And that's the feeling I have. So could you speak to that and maybe clarify what probably rode on whose coattails or what?
There's also, sorry, food, by the way, at the back a little bit. We didn't know who.
That's that's correct. Development is a vehicle just to sort of push Hindutva. So they would do the same thing. As I myself said that Congress and BJP does the same. Only thing, these people have a vision, in to transform India into Hindu Rashtra. And Hindu Rashtra is nothing but they have explicated by their seniors that Hindu Rashtra is going to be modeled after something like Hitler, Germany, and Mussolini's Italy. So those kinds of things, and they're pushing it out that end. So I did not understand the former one, that neoliberalism was brought by Hindutva.
I was trying to. I'm saying that Modi was able to implement more neoliberal policies. He's able to.
I myself said that because he had to convince people that he serves neoliberal masters better than Congress did.
Yeah.
Okay, and the time came when the performance of Congress, started sort of faltering during the UPA 2. So that period actually stands out because whatever that happens, there is the neoliberal center is not convinced that Congress would really carry on. So by that time, Modi becomes a choice person. Okay, and he has not come suddenly there. He has convinced over a period of more than a decade that the way he actually modeled Gujarat, and this was prototype as to what would happen there. So he has opened up everything, all kinds of natural resources. Whosoever wants, if you look back, he projected Gujarat model as certain mesmerized people, but the fact remains that Gujarat model was an open kind of thing. And with that, he convinced the entire capitalist bloc, then supported him. And Indian elections, etc., without capitalist bloc supporting, you can't win. It is just a fluke that sometimes it would happen. This first past the post election also is a schema that needs to be focused, because India, like country, which is actually museum of diversity, this is the most singularly more unsuitable system for India. Even if a 10% vote or 5% votes, and which actually could be translated into vote banks. Okay, and this again relates back to the caste, etc., and Ambedkar himself. So this entire thing is a gamut of complexity. So with this, it becomes a way, to rule. This system only was adopted because this is the only system which would ensure perpetuation of a particular class rule. This is the content of that.
My name is Faizan. I'm Faizan Siddiqui. I'm working on a PhD at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT. Amid the doom and gloom and the criticism, which is very required, and as someone who knows a lot about what's going on the ground, what has gone on in the last at least 30 years, empirically speaking, where would you say we should look for examples of like change that we will, or good change from a caste point of view? Or what are the examples that we can look towards and try to understand why things work in this place and get inspiration from it to inform our current struggles?
Yeah. You see, there is a lot of ferment in Indian society that can be seen there, and it has been there, but there is no clarity as to which way to go. Now, Dalit movement, for instance, got stuck. Now, right in the roots, I just highlighted, if you recall, something like the formation of the Dalit movement. It is something like a middle class orientation, none other. Meaning Ambedkar overwhelmed the movement, and whatever he says or his observations are really $1 million lesson in that. So he actually said almost everything. So in the fag end of his life, in 1953, he says that whatever he has done only benefited a section of urban Dalits. He realized, and I could not do anything for my rural brothers. And he uh, kind of asked these people who visited him that time, Scheduled Caste Federation unit of his area, can you fellows launch a land satyagraha? And thereafter, the three satyagrahas take place. 1953 itself, just after going back, he does that. 1959, 1964, 65. So these are confessions of Ambedkar himself, but Dalit movement would not take a lesson. So what happens thereafter is that Dalit movement actually gets stuck with something like a non-material thing, asmita and things like that, which could be taken or dismissed as an abstraction. Because nothing on ground, right? And it becomes something like a leader-centric. Okay. And the middle class develops its own kind of vested interest. Ambedkar's vision was, like Du Bois, for instance, a talented 10. So Ambedkar also visualized that a few people, because not all people could be developed together, so few people would rise, take positions in, say, bureaucracy, for instance, or go to the legislation and have a protective cover for the Dalit masses. It can be looked back whether such things is plausible. The people who rise up probably undergo class transformation. And this is precisely happened. And Ambedkar would sort of lament, कि ये पढ़े लिखे लोगों ने मुझे धोखा दिया. That was destined, in a way. So these were the dilemmas of Dalit movement and got stuck like that. So there was no way out. So it was, you wanted some positive thing to be said. And we both are associated with Una was an experiment of that kind. And that stands to be the lone experiment. So if you take, if even Dalit took it strategically, that every time the atrocity happened on Dalit get isolated. Right. That is to be, meaning even the progressive people, is conspicuous with their absence. They do not go there. If at least to be, meaning it is not, I am not saying with that angle, but some communal incidents happen, say Gujarat riots, wherein Muslims were butchered. So every progressive organization in India marked an attendance there. Okay, fact finding. There are 107 fact finding that happened on Gujarat riot. But in Dalit atrocity, nobody will go. It is an affair of Dalit. They are totally isolated. And there is no option for Dalit than lamenting. They just weep that we are weak. Now, what happens with Una? It takes a different turn. For instance, we wanted to search our strengths of Dalit. What are the strengths of Dalits? There is no one in the world. There is something like, there is nothing that does not have a contradiction. That way I can formulate a theorem that there is nothing in the world which does not have a strength. Yeah. Okay. So Una people were flogged because of playing animals, doing their caste vocation. Can that be strength? Yes. What was considered to be weakness could be strength. So suddenly you stop doing that. Yeah. Okay. Amplify that with throwing the carcasses into collector office, and that would inconvenience people. This is precisely happened. And demand in return 5 acres of land. Okay. Very innocuous, but it's a marked departure from what happened in the history. This was Una. Now, to carry on, it takes lots of things. So now it depends. The time will tell, because this strategy has this content. Not everybody will understand it the way I said it, but this is at the back. Now, this should inspire and role. So we imagine rightly that this will have a kind of this would be replicated in many places. People would derive inspiration from this, and to that extent, again, it happened. Okay, when Jignesh became a face of the movement, and he inspired a lot of in many states the similar kinds of movement. People wanted to try out, the youth who really face the heat of the thing because they do not see any future ahead. So this is one experiment which is still work in progress, and we are at that to make it take it to the logical end. I do not have another one because there is a lot of unease among the Dalit youth because I go uh, all over India and have that constituency I claim to be mine. So I can say with little this thing, but the alternate that we suggest or I tend to suggest is not immediately swallowed. At the rational level, they do see the point, but there is so much of an overload and baggage, that will have to be displayed. Because still, unfortunately, it might not be exaggeration, but only I keep on saying such things in 1.25 billion people.
In terms of so-called mainstream Dalit parties or who kind of claim to have that space, I'm like referring to most prominently Bahujan Samaj Party, but also Lok Jan Shakti Party or the parties in Maharashtra, many factions. So, do you think that their whole coming together as a political party and to participate in this bourgeois democracy was itself a mistake, or when they came, like when Kanchiramji started this movement and kind of palm safe and came up with that, was there any scope at that time? Was there anything different at that time, or which has now been corrupted, or it was always their fate?
No, I would see within the given framework, if somebody has really made a success in that, it was a Kashiram.
Yes.
You have to give him full 100 marks. So it's a brilliant strategist, and he showed it. Okay, only pitfall is that it was based on a caste as an idiom. Okay, and caste, that needs to be fully understood that caste is not an ordinary category. It's not unlike other sociological categories, that one speaks of. Caste only knows how to split. Okay, so it's a divisive category. It splits like amoeba. There is no end. So you cannot integrate people on basis of caste. That's the pitfall. So now getting admixture of something like Bahujan and all that kind of thing, counting caste, that arithmetic was tried out by Congress also. So as a tit for tat kind of strategy, 100 marks to Kashiram. But there is an intrinsic kind of flaw in whole thing. So unless that is addressed, there is no hope. As regards all these other Dalit parties, etc., they are not to be much counted, because one way that they are all splinter thing and they are very confused. Many people would try out Kashiram's things, etc. In Maharashtra, that was tried out, and they even could not repeat it. Okay, so the strength, and everybody is kind of uses the caste as a basic kind of category, and they meet the same end. They meet not the same end, but they actually end as a rent seeker. Only in the election time they crop up, and they will kind of seek the rent. Most of the parties actually operate like that. I rent in terms of something like getting some seats from the mainstream party, or getting some berth like Athole does, and this way. or getting a hard cash. Okay.
Yes, okay.
Yes, we don't need to introduce ourselves, right? Because you didn't, so I'm okay. Right. So my question is a counterfactual one. What if, since you spoke about it, what if there was no Pune Pact and Dr. Ambedkar had succeeded as he had succeeded with getting the separate electorates for Dalits? Do you think things would have been different, and would the history of the subcontinent turned out differently?
Yeah, it could be speculative answer because I do not see the things would have been drastically different, but at least the separate electorate provided for the independent voice of Dalit. That could have happened, and it could have given a different turn to the entire episode, right? So that much for sure. So whatever has happened when giving up separate electorate and joint electorates, etc. In Kashiram's language, it was the provision for the stooges. So all the Dalits, the fun is that this political reservation, Ambedkar by that time had realized that it was totally kind of counterproductive. Okay, that he himself thereafter could not win a single election. Two times he tried and he could not. He was defeated by something like non-entities. So this was the aim, because it all depended upon the mainstream votes, and the majority votes. So no Dalit with independent kind of stature could get elected. So he realized, and when he was in Constituent Assembly, he tried to say it, but he could not. When there was so much of a pressure that everybody wanted to give them reservation, right? And another kind of evidence of that is that at least Ambedkar prevented saying that okay, it should be limited to 10 years. 10 years from the constitution implemented in 1950. Before those 10 years are expired, and how many times it expired? Probably say 7 times. Okay. So every time before that, there will not be any news also. It automatically gets renewed for next 10 years. So this itself shows that in whose interest it is. Okay. When it came up, when Kashiram came to the scene, he said that wo chamcha raj paida kiya hai. So that's in a way. But as I said earlier, that with separate electorate, that there would have been something like drastic change in the situation. I don't imagine that could happen. Only thing, if Dalits had used this independent voice and kind of carved out a path for them, that could have been different.
Yeah, so just a follow-up question, because obviously, those who are aware that separate electorates were sort of asked by the Muslims in 1906. At the time, interestingly opposed by Jinnah, who later was sort of castigated for having supported it. But my question really is, do you think if separate electorates were granted, there could be an alliance between Muslim League and the Dalits, which would then be a counterweight, and ultimately the subcontinent would be spared?
One possibility is certainly that there would have been a kind of force created, because independently you can align with that. But if you produce the stooges to start with, they will toe their line, no? So there is just a possibility. It is in possibility realm that this could happen, and it could have given a different turn. Even the partition was not something like inevitable. It was kind of artificial solution. And communal solution at that. So this could have been averted. Really.
Thank you very much for really very comprehensive and cohesive presentation. So I have basically two questions. One is a comment. One is that from this analysis that you presented, it's very clear that Dalit problem is just not a problem of the Dalits. It's just not a problem of Dalits. It's a problem of renovation and renewal of Indian society.
Absolutely.
So Dalits actually have to be, and others, in the forefront of transformation of Indian society. So my second question is that, is there any effort to create a defense organizations to fight back attacks on the Dalits? Like, I come from Punjab. In the 90s, during the militancy, when, like a lot of our villages were being attacked by the goons, recruited by the police. So we formed defense committees in every village. And as a result, we were able to catch a lot of these goons and as well as, defeat these attacks on our villages. So are there any efforts being made?
The first observation is very correct, because Dalit constitute the foundational scaffolding of Indian society,
Exactly, yes.
and many people mistake it. The caste, etc., is spoken in terms of that classical graded inequality, etc. Today's situation is not that really. They they are wanting to artificially preserve this thing, and Dalits are the pivot in the entire schema. So to make Dalit understand of their state in the Indian society and the way out is very necessary. So that constitutes a crucial point. Another obligation they cast on left, because that they have the advanced kind of those ideological weapons that could be used to consolidate. Because if these two streams converge, today it is totally diverged and they are acceleratedly divergent on a divergent path. So this is the only kind of hope in India. If this now, it is not going to happen in our lifetime, but in at least in a shortest possible time, if these two forces realize and come together, that is the only hope for India, because otherwise it is going to be very difficult. Second question, again, it is contingent upon the right consciousness. So, Dalit, there is so much vociferous kind of tendencies, like as I said, caste knows only splitting. So you can see that happened. So Ambedkar, with quite labor, meaning great effort, tried to imagine Dalit. He created kind of Dalit, consolidating it was a quasi class. Ambedkar is always actually kind of seen as a caste man, but he was actually fighting in a way, in his own way. His conceptualization, meaning he was not a Marxist, etc. So his conception of class was not a Marxian class. But all said and done, he actually tried to imagine Dalit as a quasi class in that way. He did not utter caste, and he always used a class. But unfortunately today, with this kind of process that I depicted, Dalits are no more Dalits. Now they identify with their subcaste. So you must have heard something like Mala Madiga syndrome, which Andhra Pradesh 1995. That and that spread it everywhere, and at the base of it is reservation. Whereas in neoliberal times, I keep on repeating these figures because we studied something like 1997, 91 neoliberalism policies were adopted, all euphoria. So the public employment really rose. So it stabilized around something like 94, 95. And we took a base in 97 to 2007. So that decade kind of. So at the level of 197 lakhs of total public employment, there was a reduction in 2007 of 18.7, 1.87 million employment. Indian economy is rising, population is rising, so there should be growth in that. But the public employment really reduced by 1.87, something like 9%. Okay, and nobody knows. So what does it mean? And even high school student also can tell you that effectively reservation in net terms has ended, right?
Yeah.
But as this was happening, the resonance of reservation had reached the zenith.
Yeah.
So everybody, almost every community were demanding, and there were reservation. And now that was 2007. Now we are 2017 decade. So if this I cannot communicate to the people, what is the use of my wasting my efforts again to go back in? It has again dropped further. Okay, but the reservation thing as demands are really growing. So these are the paradoxes, and as I see, it was by design. So unless people realize there is so much to understand by Dalits and all others, those people who want India be regaining its not a Hindutva glory, but its rightful place, then there is so much to be done.
I mean, it's a global market, right? And there are also crises in other countries. And, sometimes when something breaks, it sometimes breaks somewhere else, and then its effects are somewhere else. What do you think is, like, from a global point of view, what's going on at this time?
Globally, also similar things are going on, but India becomes a sort of laboratory case, to see that. With all fundamental forces, this is integral with the neoliberalism. This is all-round crisis. The crisis is going to only deepen, and the global controllers, those people also do not know the solution. So this is just a patch-up kind of management that is going on. Now it's a post-neoliberalism they started talking about, because nothing worked. Okay, within a short time, the Washington Consensus policy, etc., flopped. So now the earlier times, the free market was being said seeking something like a right price. Okay, this is in economical terms.
Yeah.
The right price. It is not. Now that right price could not be struck by the market forces. Now they say that to is seek the right institutions. Okay, so it has come to that. And they would glorify something like in Indian context, they would glorify caste. Okay, the people were ashamed to talk about caste. That something like this was the picture, up to 1970s, the people were ashamed to
Absolutely.
admit that they believe in God.
Yeah.
They they are religious people. Now they flaunt, with the tikka, vermilion tikka on this thing. Every other person wears that. Then you will find every other person wearing those threads, bunch of threads on. What are these kinds of things? And they are openly speak about justifying caste. There are scholars, there is a tribe of these neoliberal scholars in India. They are selling that how castes were good institution and how even Dalit can develop with the caste. They say it's social capital, And there are some stray examples like Tirupur knitwear industry in Tamil Nadu, done by these Congo Gounders, and they project that. The real analysis, etc., also has been done. Well, for instance, in Harvard University, 3 people, all are not 3 from Harvard, but Tarun Khanna and Lakshmi Iyer and with another person together, they wrote a nice paper saying that how that Tirupur, what is the actual Tirupur, and what made the Tirupur. But these things are going on. Globally, similar things are happening. You take any country in that fundamental right-wing forces are on rise, and there is no place for the thing. State is getting more and more repressive. Any kind of voice actually gets suppressed. So this is the trend. But how far they are going to manage this is a question, because this is not going to be sustained.
No.
Obviously, it's not going to be
Yeah.
sustained.
Yeah.
Now there are technologies, all modern technologies like they are driving in very different ways again. So theoretically, there may not be any job for people.
Yes.
Exactly.
So
So when-
corollary is that it is driving towards socialization. But anyway, again, that oft-repeated thing that objective conditions are right, but subjective forces are not ready.
On that note, this was I believe, a very healthy dialogue that really gave us good pointers, and he did not refer to his notes either. That means he lives and he breathes these issues. One of the, for me, personal takeaways was about how caste and class kind of dynamics function and also almost kind of juxtapose each other, and they could be used inter alia if we consider it in an Indian context. But unfortunately, a revolution that we are all hoping for is being snatched away. And so if we have to design or if we have to work on it, there is a lot of work to be done. But at least we have something to think upon when we go back home. We should maybe go back to our notes and think that there is something we have not done, we need to do, and maybe get out of our comfort zone, sometimes ego zone, and accept each other on a revolutionary praxis. Thank you so much.
Thank you.